As noble citizens, we must bypass a life of dormancy and vice to pursue the generative endeavor of a hard day's work. The benefits of these pursuits are not secured by chance or charity, but through the merit of your character and the firmness of your convictions. It is you who are planting the seeds of trees whose shade you know you shall never see.
All right, hello, welcome to a special episode of the Broken Wind podcast. We have a full deck of cards here. We got myself, the host, Butler. We got my friend and super producer, Vane, and my two very good friends, Axiom and Crocus. Say hello, everybody.
Hello.
Is that a Stardew Valley reference?
No.
What?
Crocus?
Oh, no, it's a long story.
Okay.
Crocuses are a wonderful,
like a
cute
crocus
flower.
in Stardew Valley? Isn't that the little guy who lives under the fucking
that's Krobus.
Krobus,
Close.
yeah.
You can call me Krobus if you want.
Krobus is the only one who you can, like, get to move in with you as your, like, asexual roommate. Like, you can hug Krobus, but you can't kiss Krobus.
I love that. Krobus.
I love
Krobus.
Krobus, yeah. A crocus is a flower, but I love Krobus.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think you can get a crocus flower somewhere, too. I might be wrong.
I bet.
Yeah, I think
it's
so.
It's a cute flower. Yeah. But besides cute video games, we have something very specific we want to talk about today. And it's a very broad, sweeping subject, too, but it's also something that's very important to all of us here in different ways. And it's the subject of anthropology. And we're going to talk about why anthropology. I think first, though, I want to just quickly dispense with the closing thoughts on the Sydney Sweetie ad, because I know that my friend Axiom here had some. We got the whole gang here. These two didn't get to fire off their takes about that. I am staunchly of the opinion that Sydney Sweeney's boobs are racist. I'm doing this. This is oh shit! I got the tape on the camera. Racist boobs. If I saw Sydney Sweeney, I would do this. I'd be like, get out of here with those boobs. You
He's
are
making X
racist. Yep, with my hands. I'd be like, no, bad. So that's how I would react to her. Racist boobs, but I know there were some different opinions maybe here in the group, so I wanted to hold space for those from the queer community of the podcast, which is my two friends here. So what are you thinking?
Well, as we know of all real queer people, they hate sex.
Dude, the older I get, the more I think that's correct. That's the only way to feel.
Dude, I mean, honestly, like, this is there's, like, this idea of, like, oh, this is simultaneously Nazi propaganda and a dog whistle. Those two things are inherently opposed to each other. If something's propaganda, it's making people who aren't racist into racists. If something is a dog whistle, then it is secretly for people who are already racist to signal to each other. It's like a politician would do a dog whistle so that he doesn't have to admit that he's racist, but he can pull those voters. It makes no sense for American f***ing Eagle to, like, you know, do a dog whistle as, like, Nazi propaganda for the purpose of, like, I don't know. Now, there might be, you know, whether Vin pointed out to me that like, you know, maybe the whole plan is to stir things up, and like I could see this being like maybe a very successful like psyop, but yeah.
I mean, what is advertising but a psyop? It's a very successful, the most successful psyop you know? It's like that's what it's all about. And I think that I see the point you're making, and I think that there's part of the appeal is like, oh, I get in on the joke, but it's also like. It is just dumbly, like, whatever, there's no, like, logic to it besides, like, what will get people talking about this ad. And then Crocus posted something, too, that seemed like it was kind of in response, and it's like, that could be a, like, advertising power couple where one works at Gap and one works at American Eagle, and they were just brainstorming one night in their loft of, like, oh, we'll do the racist ad, and you can do the inclusive ad, and that will get people talking, and they're right. So it's like, that's kind of how I feel like about that kind of shit.
I do think Gap has a Gap has a history of including like queer culture in their ads, at least like white queer culture. Like they had a big ad campaign with what's his name? One of your girls, he's a good dancer, skinny blonde dude, Australian, I think. Anyways, he had an ad. Did you say Billy Elliot?
Australian, but I don't know. He's a real guy, so I don't know.
No, he's a singer.
Not gay though.
And he's gay. Hold on.
I saw a production of Billy Elliot one time, and it was like an amazing production, but they had a 12-year-old kid playing Billy Elliot, and he did a goddamn backflip off of a fucking piano. And I was just kind of like, man, this is amazing, but also, like, that kid's parents are kind of fucked up. Like,
it's Troye Sivan, the person I was trying to remember his name.
Oh,
okay.
And then, but the most recent ad that I posted, I think, I don't have a lot of big opinions about the Sydney Sweeney ad. I've only seen it like once. I mean, I thought it was stupid, but, and boring. I also thought it was boring. And the Gap ad is objectively a better ad, both from an inclusivity perspective and like it's just a lot more fun to watch. It's the band Cat's Eye. I don't know if you guys know them, but they're like a like quasi K-pop band kind of, but they're like if K-pop was like actually had people from like races outside of Korea, it basically is
interesting.
And and they're, so they're part of the zeitgeist right now, and they're also incredible dancers, and it's a really good ad, and it's much better.
Well,
that's my big opinion.
It's a good ad.
Not to get too, we don't want to get too bogged down in current affairs. I wanted to take this digression for my co-host because I know that we had some strong opinions about it, and I've staked out my position, and we spent the last hour before we got recording me having everyone measure their skulls because I wanted to have all those measurements on hand. I've done a lot of skull measuring on the Sydney Sweeney ad. I've got all the numbers in front of me. I've got all the facts, and I want us to pivot back to a parallel subject of the study of human beings, which is what anthropology is supposed to be. But it's really in its like best circumstances, sort of like an anecdote to all of those poisonous ideas like phrenology,
At its worst, it could be leading to something like phrenology. Absolutely,
exactly right. That's kind of the joke I'm trying to get to here. But eugenics too. That was the other subject. I mean, it's like that, and that's the thing that ties into Sydney Sweeney ad is like anthropology is also a way to dispel the poisonous, sort of like logical extensions of eugenics, which are, people, that term has become almost meaningless in the modern day, but it does have a specific meaning. And the idea that like of genetic determinism fundamentally is like something a lot of young people are very fixated on these days. And those like black pill edits people are talking about. It's a very, I think, still very prescient subject. And that's why I wanted to talk about anthropology too, and also because of the Bible. And I think that like the Bible understood through an anthropological lens is very important these days because people are literally causing a genocide and allowing a genocide and funding a genocide with biblical justification. And so it's never been more important to dress these sort of ideas down, but in like a way that's not meant to Reddit atheist style, like out logic all of this, because there's something a lot more holistic to the study of anthropology too. And I want to hand it over to my co-host Crocus here to sort of give us, sort of her working definition, being a bit more of a subject matter expert than anyone here. So I'll hand it off to you. Okay.
So I did major in anthropology in college. It was, as a caveat, a long time ago. So I'm not up on the journals. Like but I wanted to just kind of give us like a quick primer on like what does anthropology look like today, and then like what is the history of it, and what are the modern like ethics and how they kind of interact with each other, and then we can talk about like what that means in terms of like the top like current events and the topics that we want to talk about. So I'll be quick with it, but so anthropology, broadly speaking, I describe it as the study of people. You can find more complex definitions than that, but like broadly, that's what it is. I picked it as a major because I never understood anything about the people around me, and I had undiagnosed ADHD. And so it was like, I could not pick a major that I wasn't like deeply interested in. And I was learning so much about like how to deal with other humans by taking these classes. So I just studied it. Like I never knew what I was going to do with it. I never did that much with it besides like now I'm in like marketing, which I know is like, you know, the root of all evil, or at least a part of the root of all evil. But anthropology does help me with it. But that's, you know, that's part of what we're going to talk about. So there's in the US, like today, or at least when I was in school, it was basically broken up into like 4 broad subfields, which are cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, which largely studies like evolution, and like the human body sort of more holistically, like you know, someone might be researching trends about like what different cultures like eat, and what's consistent about what different like groups eat versus what they don't, and like what that does for them, and and like it's still like, but it's still biologically based. Like so that's biological anthropology. A lot of it is also just about studying evolution. Linguistic anthropology, which is obviously the study of like the development of languages and current languages and the history of the development of human language. And then archaeology, which is the study of human remains and artifacts. And to define artifacts, it's anything that's been changed by human hands. So you can actually, people think about archaeology as something that's like all about the past, and a lot of it is, but you can also do archaeology on like modern day artifacts. Like I took a class about that, which was cool. You know, because the way that the
19th century wasn't that long ago, but it also was, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but like you can look at like, okay, for example, the way that public bathrooms are designed affects the way that we as a culture perceive like personal space and privacy. And that's like an example of modern day archaeology, because in any given culture, in any given country, they're different. Like there are a lot of places, I think in Europe, like, there's a lot more privacy to a public bathroom situation. Like there's like a full, like enclosed bathroom space, versus here we're like used to kind of having gaps on the sides and the top and the bottom. And it just like makes you, it's the way that the physical environment that you're in affects the way that you, perceive like the world around you and the way that you behave in the world around you. So anyway, I just really liked that class, the archaeology of us, it was called. So that's kind of like the general structure. And then there's like subfields in all of those. Like obviously, I kind of mostly was in cultural anthropology. I think that's really interesting.
Hey, cause I dropped out for a little. Could you just repeat the 4 large categories? It was cultural,
cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, linguistic anthropology, and archaeology. Okay, so as far as the history of anthropology, it pretty much originated in like with the colonial era. So it was like a rich man's hobby, basically. Yep. So they would travel on these expeditions and study the people there, and a tool of colonial domination. Like, I don't believe that every early anthropologist was like, oh yeah, let me help them figure out how to dominate the locals.
Definitely
but like,
not.
Right.
even
a lot of them were,
if they,
abolitionists. Yeah.
It's the definition of liberal arts, that you had to be of the affluent class. You had to be free to study these things, to be a child of the privileged.
Yeah. And the thing about it was like, and this is still a consideration today. I mean, with all science, but like definitely with anthropology, and it wasn't something that was as heavily considered at that time, was like, you can control what you're researching and you control how you approach it, but you can't control how that research is used once you published it. So even the people who didn't think that they were like developing tools to help with like cultural domination, that doesn't mean they didn't help with it, you know?
Right.
Yeah, and it's crazy today. There's examples, like I have a book by David H. Price called Anthropology as a Weapon, and it's he works for the CIA, and he's shown how the CIA has recruited anthropologists in order to work with them, essentially, just like as you work in marketing, you find it useful.
Yeah. Yes, it can be used for evil in a myriad of ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly. And it still is. Yeah. I mean, so like today, I mean, I was just reading about on Wikipedia about anthropologists being involved in the semi-recent wars in the Middle East and like Iraq and stuff. Like, so it's it's still used for evil.
It's funny. I was reading the same I was reading the Wikipedia article about anthropology, and the character of Jermaine Clement in Avatar came to mind just for like an easy like cultural analog, or like in Avatar 2.
Jermaine Clement. I believe that's also the name of the guy in Flight of the Conchords.
Yeah, I think he's saying he played him.
It's the same guy. Yeah, it's the same guy. It's he played a character in Avatar 2 who's a researcher who gets to go to. If you guys haven't seen that movie, watch it.
I've seen Avatar. I forgot he was in that.
Kicks ass. But I think just to set a scene a little bit, it's like that character is enormously conflicted because he's going to this incredible, untouched, like ocean wilderness to study these like unbelievable, gigantic animals with complex, rich inner lives, just like human beings. And he's being used as a tool to help basically like slaughter and hunt them.
Yeah, it's an old story, just like in the Finding Florida that we're telling with the Indian agent. It's kind of the same story of Pocahontas and Dances with Wolves. It's a story that's been told over and over.
I wanted to call this section the L's and W's section because like the concept of anthropology is just unavoidably inherently tied to colonialism and neocolonialism.
Social chauvinism.
I think there's also but then it's also like these are also the people who it's like when Darwin's theory of evolution was brought out, these were the ones who were like, oh, okay, this makes perfect sense. Like, these are the mass adopters of that idea and integrate that into the social sciences, which is revolutionary to do. It's like, that's really important. So, were you trying to say something there, Axe?
No, it wasn't necessarily, but I do like, if we're going to talk about like the L's of anthropology, too,
please.
One thing that I found a lot, back when I was studying philosophy with anthropologists and anthropology students is, so there's the early history of anthropology where everybody was kind of like explicitly racist as and calling all the cultures primitive or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of like modern anthropology where we have more like cultural relativism,
Yeah, it's more subtle.
This idea of like, anthropology is like much less racist now because we've decided that like, okay, these different cultures are inherently no worse or better than like, the so-called West, whatever the that means. Now that like, I've always been kind of critical of that stance for a couple of reasons. First off, there's just the epistemological question of like, okay, are, the assumptions that we've made about these other cultures correct at all? Now we're saying they're just as good, but, the data that you're saying is like, oh, this culture is just as good at things as like, the so-called West, which once again is an empty concept to me. Are we looking at whether those views of those other cultures are actually correct? So like, one thing I found really interesting was, I taught at UC Santa Cruz, and I would have students who had come from Asian countries in order to study science. And frankly, they were accused a lot of cheating. They had to learn a foreign language. They were in a country where like they didn't know anybody. And they were doing all this because they wanted to be scientists. And then you would have in Santa Cruz a whole bunch of white people who were like, nah, cultural anthropology, cultural relativism, ancient Chinese secrets are just as good. And it was still kind of based on this wildly racist stereotype that Asian people have like secret magical powers or some shit like that,
right.
I also,
Orientalism absolutely looms large in anthropology too. Yeah.
So like, and then also, now, of course, the term Orientalism comes from an anthropological text by Edward Said that, is an anthropology of anthropologies and is really good. But yeah, the other thing I want to bring up about like cultural relativism is that I think it's often like used in a really flawed and fucked up way, especially when it's like sort of historical cultural relativism. So one thing I would always tell my students in ethics classes is there would always be this argument of like, oh, well, back then everybody was cool with slavery. And I'm like, well, what about the fucking slaves, man? Like, they were never okay with this. And, you know, the idea of, like, cultural relativism of, like, oh, like, in a lot of countries, supposedly, like, sexual assault is okay. That's never been okay for the people who it's happening to. You know, so a big part of cultural relativism with, like, ethical questions, too, that I think gets, like, lost in the sauce here, is, like, who are you listening to as, like, the authority of the morality of any culture? And is there even any authority on morality for any culture, given that, like, everyone seems to, you know, hold different moral beliefs, as much as that pains me to say as a former Kantian who thinks that everybody knows what ethics is deep down. But, you know. Everybody at least ostensibly has different opinions about it.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's tricky. I was going to bring up cultural relativism as like part of the modern ethical guidelines of anthropology. So you're right. It's like definitely still a part of like I think it is working towards correcting the right thing. And it's just a question of like the way that you are interpreting it. And then like also, I think sometimes if you are an anthropologist who is studying other cultures, the impulse, and I don't know if it's good or not, but the impulse, rather than to find yourself in a position where you're placing your own sort of like moral framework on another culture, is to just sort of put the concept of morals and ethics almost aside and just look for reasons why things are happening, why people are choosing to do certain things, or like most things don't come out of nowhere. But then another thing that which is not to say like assault is anyone's fault or anything like that, but the point is like to ask the question of like why is this a thing in this culture, and then find that out, which is, you know, that is like questionable whether that's moral to just like observe this thing and not do anything about it and not say anything about it. That is part of like, you know, what's bad still about anthropology in some ways. The other thing I was going to say is that when I was studying anthropology, we had a lot of discussions about the morals of studying other cultures that you are not part of in general. Like obviously it's still done plenty, but I spent a lot of time discussing and studying like American subcultures when I was in college, because there's bajillions of them. Like I did a paper one time about the similarities and differences between stoner culture and people who drink more on the weekends and stuff. And like there's plenty to learn at home without having to like go engage with cultures that you're not a part of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
At all. So I think that is and now that like anthropology is more of a worldwide science than it was before, there should be people in like cultures that we are not a part of who also are interested in studying their own cultures, and we can learn from each other in that way rather than like, you know, having to start from scratch. Like it's certainly, that doesn't mean there's not like a decent good way to study other cultures or engage with other cultures as an anthropologist, but it's, you know, it's not always, it's not the only thing the people do anymore, you know, which I think is good.
Is there like another? And by the way, I also want to point out that, like, these are all great points. Like, I don't want to shit on cultural relativism entirely, because we don't want white anthropologists going to other cultures and being like, I will tell you what moral is. You know?
Yeah, and that's certainly what they were doing. Even the people who meant well in the beginning of anthropology, that's absolutely what they were doing,
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, another quick question I have, is there anthropology of white people by, like, people from other cultures? You know, I'd be very interested.
That's such a good question. Sure I've never seen any, but I hope so.
Yeah, it speaks to...
What is going on, guys? We need answers.
What's wrong with us?
What you've been saying speaks to, I think, the nature of anthropology and what the practice involves, and that we have to be careful with how we use it, because the main tool of anthropology is imagining yourself as an outside observer. And that's where you have so many modern college theses today will be like the anthropology of an American workplace. And that is absolutely much better to explore anthropology in a field that you actually know, as opposed to trying to, like the early anthropologists, move to some other society and think that you can speak to all of human nature or all of morality and things like that. That's, of course, obtuse to treat anthropology that way. And I think all of this ties in as well. We were talking about the concept of the West. It ties into the earliest Western historian that I am aware of, which is Herodotus. And really history, which we talk about so often on this show, also ties so much in with anthropology, because you're able to create the version of yourself that you want to tell. And we know that history is written by the victor. For example, Herodotus created the concept of the Orient East, and he defined himself, the West, schismogenetically, really, which is an anthropological term about how humans divide themselves into tribal groups and define themselves in opposition to one another. And that's a great early example of that, of the West and Herodotus saying, we're going to be different from the Orient. The West is going to be different. It's going to be uniquely free in a way that all of Eastern society has not been so far. And that in itself is kind of an anthropological idea, much like the noble savage, which was an early idea of enlightenment.
Major
the idea
anthropological
of,
L.
Well, no, also a massively important one for discovering enlightenment. That's a concept to, of course I was going to bring up Graeber. Yeah, of course I was going to. And the dawn of everything.
I got space for that.
Yeah, the dawn of everything, that's kind of one of the central points of it, is that the noble savage, or really the Enlightenment ideals, came from our close contact with the Native Americans, and there likely is something to that the notions of freedom that we got from coming into close contact with a quote-unquote primitive people really did start to change the mindset of Europeans and made some Europeans become the early anthropologists because of the popularity of these genres like the noble savage literature, which many people would have had a book on their shelf if you were if you had a library.
Affluent European.
If you were an affluent European, you likely had
definitely among
several
the British and stuff,
noble savage books on your shelves.
I mean, the question that I had when reading that part of Graeber too was like, well, sure, you've shown this influence like on Europeans from what Europeans thought of like indigenous people, and he was like, well, I can show that there clearly was this influence, and like, should we necessarily totally discount these sources, given the backdrop of like other evidence we have? I did kind of think like, yeah, maybe we should, because there is kind of like a clear political perspective, which is one of like, well, all these Enlightenment ideas by the people who are presenting them from, indigenous people were things that people thought were horrible ideas. Like, it was commonly agreed upon. Like,
but it did make them question why they can't speak freely or things like that, I think, right? Like,
but the question is whether indigenous people were the ones who were actually saying that, or whether this influence came from European people trying to disparage, indigenous people, and therefore, like, it's totally an untrustworthy source.
It almost becomes conflated and doesn't matter at that point who said it first. It's just clear that both sides are sounding very similar, in my opinion. That we have examples like Kondiaronk, the Native American chief, who's talking very much early Enlightenment, free speech, what we consider to be American values. We see how he may have come into contact with Montesquieu, who's really the person who comes up with the notion of the spirit of the law, which really does inspire the founding fathers to draft a constitution and ultimately to argue that law needs to represent the will of the people in spirit, not just in the letter of the law. And so I think it really doesn't matter whether it's the Europeans or the Native Americans. It's just, I think that they're coming in close proximity, that you have schismogenetically, you have basically struggle and acceleration of ideas starting to happen, I think, from people coming in contact with each other.
Right. Well, and, I want to get into our favorite anthropological digressions a little more soon, too. One of the key theses of Robert Pirsig's Far Inferior second book is that, like, American language in a lot of regions of the country is profoundly influenced by the speaking patterns and language of Native American dialects. We know this to be true of, like, West African dialects throughout a lot of parts of the South, East and Southwest and stuff too, that, like, my point is that, like, one thing I forgot when I was, like, just sort of looking into anthropology for this episode is how much less backward looking it is than I remembered. I remembered it being very much of a historical and archaeological profession, but it's not necessarily as much as I thought. It's actually a lot more about, like, the contemporary and the study of that, like the contemporary human being and how they got to be who they are now.
Right.
And that was something I forgot that I found interesting, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's, it's not about, like, always necessarily, like, it's just about, like, what got us to this point? Like, how did this person become who they are? What are the factors that led to this person speaking the way they are and being who they are in this moment in time?
Yeah.
And that's always an interesting and complicated and necessarily, like, morally gray sort of story. And I also cannot wait to hopefully someday read the Chinese study of the German and the German American and why they're the way they are, because I think that's important scientific work that needs to be done by the party.
I want to talk
need to
about
get some top scientists over here and into Europe.
There was one other part of current modern day anthropology ethics that I wanted to talk about before we get more into digressions, because I think it's important, especially when we start talking about, like, archaeology and like Israel and stuff, which is the examples that I saw were about studying like plantations in the South, but it's about, there's a consideration that it was almost just starting to layer into the discussion when I was in college. So it's very new, but I think incredibly important, which is actually considering both engaging with the community that you're studying while you're studying it, and also descendant communities, especially with archaeology, engaging with descendant communities while you're doing the studying, and also giving back, like, actually considering, like, where do the artifacts live? Who benefits from the people who are paying to come and see those things? Who are we hiring, and how are we training people to actually teach on those things? Like, you can still see this in action in the South, like I was talking about. There are plantation tours that you can go on that are incredibly, like, focused on chattel slavery, and there are ones that, like, basically brush it under the rug as much as possible. And also there are like archaeological studies that have been done that have specifically engaged with, like I said, descendant communities who are still local to the area or not, and taken into account, along with the physical artifacts, the folklore and stories that their family have been telling them for generations, and worked that into the history that they're teaching about the property. And then also they hire people who are part of those descendant communities to do the teaching. They engage them as part of the project, along with just talking to them, and they give money back and keep the stuff that they find in the community where it belongs. And this is incredibly important, and it's just something that was, like, not at all considered, especially, like, in archaeology when we talk about, like, all the shit that's in the British Museum.
Right. And to tie this
to
tie this into contemporary terms, and what Butler had also just said about anthropology being not just something about exploring the past, but also setting the tone of the future, is how today,
just understanding it.
Like I was talking about how at the time Herodotus is defining what does it mean to be Western. You also have, during the Cold War, in the dawn of everything, a great example that they brought up of how anthropology can be weaponized is simultaneously during the Cold War, the Soviet Union anthropologists are trying to look at evidence to prove that human nature is good and sharing and social, whereas the West, quote unquote, their anthropologists are looking to prove that humanity is more selfish. And you could even stumble on the same piece of evidence and take away radically different conclusions about what this means about human nature, quote unquote. And with that said, tying this into contemporary times, we see that Donald Trump is trying to reshape physically the museums, to take away certain exhibits, to not talk about certain things. And that's very deliberate. At the Smithsonian Museum, for example, we're seeing he said he doesn't like the version of history they're telling because it talks too much about how bad slavery was his quote, which is interesting because I don't know how else you're supposed to talk about slavery, for example.
Right.
Right. Well, and I want to go. The last thing I want to say before we get into like fully Graber mode, we get fully graved out here, is that, and I love Grabe, but return to the question of why anthropology is that, like, I think when we talk about like what makes, human beings different from other animals, that's a question I think about a lot. And there's a lot of answers that have been posed for that, and language being the big one.
Like
and
Aristotle
I don't
said.
think, right, like, I don't even think that necessarily language is unique to human beings when you really get granular with what language is and the way other animals communicate with each other. I think that, like, it's more about the way we use language and storytelling in particular, and like the importance of storytelling as like a social organizational tool.
And maybe the imagination,
in the world.
like how we can imagine ourselves and what we mean in the future, what we're going to be in the future.
Yes, it's an imagination tool too. It's a tool for like what can the future be like. It's a tool for like
project into the future, project earnings.
Yeah, that's all like layers of storytelling. And we're talking about lots of books after this, but there's one book in particular, like I said, that looms large to me. And the point I want to make is like, the thing I loved about anthropology when I first encountered it is it's got this way of being like, okay, these things are comprehensible, these things are understandable. It's very demystifying. And the book of stories I'm talking about that's so significant that I think must be understood anthropologically is the Bible. Because once again, it's like, yeah, it's an important book to a lot of people and it has like some good stuff in it. I don't like to, I'm a mature enough person that I don't like to like be like rude about people's beliefs in general unless they're just flat out bigots. But there's nothing truly that special about the Bible as a like holy text that you can't find in many other spiritual traditions. There's many good things to it, but at the end of the day, it has a certain significance because of its historical context and its context in the development of written language, in the development of human storytelling.
Yeah, right.
And so those are things that carry a lot of psychic weight for people, but it's not because necessarily this book has this powerful, messianic, eschatological significance. And that's the problem is like we're living in this society that's captive to these people that believe this with their heart and soul. Right. And so like,
there's
anthropology is the way to kind of understand this.
Yeah, there's a great connection between anthropology and religion. One of the people who is considered a father of anthropology is Edward Burnett Tyler, and he posited this idea called the anthropology of religion, which was that basically the earliest forms of anthropological studies were religious studies. And I think that has become also a major branch. Perhaps that overlaps with, that's probably the cultural or maybe the linguistic field of archaeology that you had been discussing, Crocus. But from my perspective, as someone who is outside the field of anthropology and has no formal degree, but I've certainly taken more of an interest than the average person, I think. And that also brings up another point that I wanted to make, which is that I think the average person is very far behind in terms of their anthropological studies. It seems to me, like many fields of science, that as we reach this regressive stage of our social system, that progress, at least amongst the average person, has all but stopped. And that's at least where the book, The Dawn of Everything, while there's some very valid criticisms, I think the central point that our discussions about anthropology need to evolve, and they need to evolve very fast because they're quickly breaking apart, and the average person is incredibly far behind in terms of their knowledge of things that were well known in the early 1900s, such as the fact that barter does not exist. It's an entirely mythological creation of post-liberal society. The fact of the matter is that virtually all anthropologists agree that barter does not exist in nature. They've not found
just on this, like on the subject of lost information too. It's like people had an understanding of why feudalism was a f***ing bad social system too. You know, it's like that feels like really key lost information that we're going to be dealing with the consequences of, and it sucks. Before I want to get into Graeber, but I wanted to ask Axiom too if he had any thoughts on the Bible as literature, because we've sort of talked around that in the past. I was just curious if what kind of things you might have to say on that subject too, like the way Bible's handled.
I mean,
in the modern day,
slog as a piece of literature. There's a lot of like reading about genealogies and shit.
Right.
The Bible's also kind of crazy because, like, I was raised Catholic and had an experience that I think a lot of people have had of, like, actually sitting down one day as a kid and reading the whole f***ing thing.
Yeah.
And just being like, Christ, what the hell? There's hardly any gay BDSM here. This is nothing
it's the
like
quickest
what I
way to
learned
become
at
an
church.
atheist.
I've also read the whole Bible, and now I'm an atheist.
But like, I'm not even like an atheist, but like, the Bible is like an interesting text insofar too, is like actually sitting down and going through it and reading it. Like, you're gonna spend a lot of time looking at rules that no one follows. Unless you're
right.
Mixed
fabrics.
Respect for Hasidic people because they actually
the people who like
actually take the text for real, seriously, and don't work backwards like originalists do.
But yeah, like, so that's a big part of it. I think also, when we ask ourselves this question and kind of like, I like to imagine that like I'm an alien visiting Earth for the first time because that's how I feel most days. And like asking this question of like, okay, so why do all of these like colonial people for whom like this whole weird concept that's only a couple hundred years old of like whiteness was so like central and important? Why are we following this like Arabic religion from like the Middle East? And there's just historical, like, that happened to be the one that, won a whole lot of battles in, like, those parts of the world. The other thing that always strikes me, especially, like, I'm planning my own wedding right now, and I was at a wedding, like, a couple months ago that was, like, a Christian Protestant wedding. Christianity spends a lot of time saying every other religion is horse shit. It
does.
And like
there's interesting history to that, right?
Yeah, like it would be sort of, so like I'm Buddhist, my wife is like involved with SGI Buddhism. It would be kind of insane if you went to one of those meetings and they started like talking shit on like Sikhs or something. You'd be like, you'd be really weirded out. It would seem out of place. And yet, if you go to like literally Christian
that's all
thing
that Christianity
ever,
is. Some
they
sects
always
are
slip in. They always got to slip in the one true God. And if you go to a Christian wedding too, like, the enforcement of like heterosexuality to an extent that also isn't in the Bible, because like there's some gay shit in the Bible. They were trying to them angels, like,
Oh yeah,
it's like believing in one fewer God than you, essentially. Like, that's really what being an atheist is I believe in one fewer God than everybody else does when they practice religion.
Yeah, it's interesting too because there's a couple like offhanded mentions of God, I can't remember her name, but she's mentioned like 17 times in the Bible or some shit. Of like this goddess character where Yahweh is like, get rid of all the poles of her, like we are f***ing clearing house.
it's not Adam's first wife, is it?
Sounds like a breakup.
No, that's Lilith. And
Lilith is a crazy character too, though. There's a lot of interesting shit in the Bible.
Lilith, strictly speaking, isn't like, she's never named in the Bible, but like she's an explanation for why, like, in the first book of Genesis, like, man and woman were created as one, and then like a couple books later, there's the whole thing with the rib. So that was like the Jewish Talmudic interpretation was like, well, these must be two different women.
Right.
But yeah, like there was, God, I'm trying to remember her name. I'll figure it out. But there was,
it's okay.
There's a few mentions in it of like this other goddess figure who's basically being condemned in the text of the Bible. They've found like really old archaeological references of like Yahweh being married to this like goddess figure, which is also just kind of f***ing insane because like by the time you have this being codified as a text, all the mentions are like, F that, we are not doing that anymore.
God got married, right?
I actually love the idea of the whole concept of monotheism being because of a divorce. That's really fun to think about.
Yeah, I think there's really something to that. It's like, seriously. Well, what I wanted to say is, like, on the subject of demystification. What were you saying?
The Canaanite goddess Ashura.
Ashura.
Okay.
Who was widely worshipped by early Israelites.
Well,
yeah.
And like, I wanted to say, like, on the subject of demystification, where it's like, we're talking about the Bible is obviously incredibly historically significant, but for the people who it was like, they were contemporarily, like, creating the Bible, like, the biblical period, I don't think it's insane to compare it to something like a Marvel fandom, too, where it's like, there is a layer of, like, where these are just the stories that human beings tell each other to kind of
Greek
just like
mythology,
what they do to pass the time.
right? Like,
same, every f***ing religion ever, because I think when you imagine back to a world where we don't have screens and technology, we just have the stories we tell each other and the shadows on the f***ing cave wall, then yeah, it's like, why not build this whole I mean, that's one of my favorite things about Hinduism, even if like there's a lot of problematic like philosophical elements. The Hindu pantheon is, I think, one of the funniest in religion, and they have a lot of like hilarious hijinks that are like very like are cartoonish, but it's like, it's also just like humans having fun with each other. And then, you get to a character like Hanuman in Hindu mythology too, that's fascinating from like an anthropological perspective. And people have asked this before. It's like, well, were there like is that like a different sort of like hominid human being preserved in the religious historical record? Like there's like really fascinating questions that you'll never get a good answer to. But like that, when we stop thinking of these things as like the aliens from space sort of stories, and just more like a little more comprehensible than that, as just again like the stories people tell each other to understand the world. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know.
I can and will easily do an episode on the anthropology of debt in the future, and we could talk about.
Let's talk grape. It's grape time. I'm ready to grape it up.
Wait, I have something to say about the Bible.
What?
Well, okay, much has been spoken and written about like the commonalities between religious texts across many different religions in terms of the types of phenomena that they're trying to explain.
Yes.
And for me, that was a huge personal turning point. So I was very religious when I went into college. I was Presbyterian. And I was like really into it. And it was specifically studying cultural anthropology and seeing all of I've talked about this a little on the podcast before, I think, but it was specifically studying cultural anthropology and learning basically how we got here, in general, in terms of like, in this specific instance, religion and why early humans would have needed to create something like religion. Learning about that and having that make so much sense to me, like logically, brought me into this like crisis area that I spent like a whole year being like, what do I actually believe in? Like not really like engaging with it. And then I had a night when I got like blackout drunk and I had to face the following week as I was trying to repair all of my friendships that this was actually about the fact that I didn't actually think I believed in God anymore because of anthropology. And and so and that
I would
like
love
the Bible
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I was just going to say, like, the Bible, when you look at it from a cultural anthropological perspective, like, there's so much in there. Like, first of all, like, a lot of the rules make sense as like things that are to protect the population and the environment that they were living in, like the shellfish thing, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then like the origin stories, like people wanted explanations for it. People have always wanted to know why things are happening.
How did we get here?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In a way that all this can be kind of tied together. We've talked a bit about philosophy, history, obviously anthropology. A lot of this all gets tied together, I feel like. And this concept that all the religions, which to me too is a major falling out moment from my religion, which was Protestantism, evangelical Protestantism. And I had a falling out when I learned that there were so many religions that really had the same story as Jesus, many which predated even Christianity. And you had basically, even going back as far as the earliest religions in Sumer, the same story of debt forgiveness. And this has definitely become an obsession of mine and of many people's. And I could do a full episode on the anthropology of debt alone. There's some great books I could recommend. Obviously, Debt by David Graeber. And then another great one would be And Forgive Them Their Debts by Michael Hudson is a great one that goes through virtually every example of debt forgiveness from every ancient king, starting back as early as historical record begins. And some of it is the only policy that we know of for many kings is that they issued debt forgiveness as soon as they started. And we basically have a record of almost every king doing this. This seems to be the reason why kings come into power, is usually on behalf of the debtor class and forgiving them. And we learn about these practices such as Jubilee of every 7 years forgiving debts. And there's a great way that this all ties in with philosophy too, which I want to bring up this quote from Friedrich Nietzsche. I think this is a great quote that shows how this concept of primordial debt created a reason for us to tell stories. So here is the quote about primordial debt. This is also written in David Graeber's book, Debt. The feeling of personal obligation, Nietzsche observes, has its origin in the oldest and most primitive personal relationship there is, in the relationship between seller and buyer, creditor and debtor. Here, for the first time, one person moved up against another person. Here an individual measured himself against another individual. We have found no civilization still at such a low level that something of this relationship is not already perceptible. To set prices, to measure values, to think up equivalencies, to exchange things, that preoccupied man's very first thinking to such a degree that in a certain sense it's what thinking itself is. Here the oldest form of astuteness was bred. Here, too, we can assume are the first beginnings of man's pride, his feeling of preeminence in relation to other animals. Perhaps our word man, manus, continues to express directly something of this feeling of the self. The human being describes himself as a being which assesses values, which values and measures, as the inherently calculating animal, selling and buying, together with their psychological attributes, are even older than the beginnings of any form of social organizations and groupings. Out of the most rudimentary form of personal legal rights, the budding feeling of exchange, contract, guilt, law, duty, and compensation was instead first transferred to the crudest and earliest social structures in their relationships with similar social structures, along with the habit of comparing power with power, of measuring, of calculating. And that's the end of that quote. That actually, although
Nietzsche, boy.
Yeah, Nietzsche. Although that was Although that was a great quote, I think that actually wasn't the one that I was looking for.
Well,
but it
you're
was
out of Nietzsche time, pal.
I'm out of Nietzsche time.
You've used up all your Nietzsche space on this podcast, but
you don't know how
I
much
do
I
want
have to say that as a philosophy teacher.
You're gonna allow more Nietzsche? Okay,
yeah,
you know what? We'll expand the Nietzsche allowance then. I'm overruled, but I wanted
not
to.
overruling you. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, so here's that Nietzsche quote. Finally, with the impossibility of discharging debt, people also come up with the notion that it is impossible to remove the penance, the idea that it cannot be paid off, until all of a sudden we confront the paradoxical and horrifying expedient with which a martyred humanity found temporary relief, that stroke of genius of Christianity. God sacrificing himself for the guilt of human beings, God paying himself back with himself, God as the only one who can redeem man from what for human beings has become impossible to redeem. The creditor sacrificing himself for the debtor, out of love. Can people believe that? Out of love for his debtor.
I wanted to get into our digressions now, too, so we can go full grave mode. I'd love to talk about the stoned ape theory at some point, too, and try and reclaim that from the Rogan verse.
I think we've done enough grave, honestly, in my opinion.
I've
graved it out for this episode, unless someone else has.
You're all graved up, my friend?
I'm graved up.
I want to briefly bring up the pirates of it all if we're going to be talking about
yeah,
grave.
please.
I also want to, shouts out to Wilson, because he died as soon as their big-ass book came out, so we kind of just, give
shouts
it all
out
up to Graver.
Salute.
But, the other David is also important. But, yeah, pirates, man, how the fuck do they work?
Yeah, that was a good book, too, the Pirate Enlightenment one.
The Pirate Enlightenment, yeah, which is about, the Malagasy coast, and I think,
pretty cool.
As much as I've shat on, cultural relativism, and everybody was like that back then, I think, there are some really great points about, we often, write off pirates as horrible people in our modern lens because of the brutality. That was pretty much true for any group of people on boats during that time.
I was going to say that, right?
But it's a secular ideology. It's the secular foundational Enlightenment ideology, really.
Yeah. As someone who also blasphemes all law of men and God, and commits crimes to the high sea, it's really interesting to see that, once again, this idea of, Enlightenment values.
Yeah, the logic of capitalism.
But also, the more, the evolution out of, everything being hierarchical under feudalism, where, if you read any, philosophy from that period, literally everything is in a ranked system of how good it is, because that's how people thought about everything.
Yeah.
And, it's just sort of, amazing to see, a strong historical source of, these Madagascar pirates, some of whom were just, had all this treasure that they couldn't sell. Some of whom were, freed slaves, because, a lot of the things pirates would do, too, would be, take over a slave ship, liberate everybody, but liberate them, of liberate sort of Shanghai, you're
now
pirates,
you're living on the
free.
Island with the pirates. But it's a different sort of life.
So,
you're freed from your old life, I suppose, and now you're living the pirate lifestyle.
Just seeing that was a, not a source of just violence and brutality, but of how we came to think hey man, not everything needs to be this stupid hierarchy, and it's not always the best way to run things.
Right. They talk about the dual power system of the dual hierarchy that pirates had. And it is a great example of historical materialist change, that life on the sea does change people, and they start to live under a different, more practical order when they're out at the ocean, that you have an executive and the captain in times of emergency, but when it's not an emergency, then you have the ability with a quartermaster to replace your captain. And that became a very pragmatic way of operating out at sea and on their pirate islands where we get a lot of the first stories of like Blackbeard the pirate and stuff. These are all like foundational to the coast of Madagascar, as you're saying, which is pretty cool. And it's something in our American mindset. This is one of the early seeds of the American mindset that, like, I do agree with their assessment. It does seem it came off the coast of Madagascar, rounded the coast of Africa, and came to America, that mindset of the pirate enlightenment. And with that came secular capitalist values and the idea that you can charge interest, for example. You don't have to listen to the Vatican telling you can't go out past this line that's arbitrary. You don't need a patent from the Vatican to go explore territory. You can go chart your own way. And that became kind of the foundational secular values of the United States as well.
I think there's very much something to that, like the trader mentality, but there's also something, I always am fascinated by the way in which like certain settings and environments just create certain kinds of people. And there is something about like boat people that's pretty consistent. And I think there's also like,
boaters for Trump.
There's mysticism. You're right. There's
still
mysticism and
superstition.
Yeah, there's mysticism and superstition everywhere, but there is something about like being on the ocean that requires a certain level of like materialism and rationality to not die. And I think that's kind of interesting and a part of where like the Enlightenment thread comes from. But also too, I wanted to say that anthropology, the way you look at and address people who exist on the fringes of legality in society, are like, that's something that always interested me too. And I want to pivot that to my digression, which is drugs. And I think that anthropologically understanding drugs is what led me to being a big believer of the Stoned Ape theory way before it was like Rogan verse canon. And the thing is that's so frustrating and annoying about that becoming like a Rogan guy thing, which never been a Rogan guy, but it's like a really pretty sound idea. I feel like there's a lot of questions. There are a lot of very valid reasons to ask, like, why are human beings different?
Yeah,
even if I don't think human beings are that fundamentally different, like there is some weird shit. What were you gonna say?
There's this moment where suddenly like humans' brains started getting like unreasonably big, kind of, and like that's like the whole reason we started giving birth so early.
We're kind
and
of
like,
an outlier.
So it is interesting. I remember just to give you some cred on not being a Rogan guy, I remember you talking to me about this like before the Rogan podcast even existed. Like I think I had recently graduated and you were in college.
I was in college when I learned about this, and I felt like, damn, and I don't think Terence McKenna even identifies as an anthropologist, but it is a profound idea to me because there is something so consistently fraught about the human relationship with drugs and their own, like, dopamine, like receptors. Because the other thing that's like, I think we're far past I don't think there's any like utopian return to human beings with mushrooms, but I think that like we're far past that point as creatures, and the way in which people can become addicted to just like symbolic logic is
memes.
The essence of the disease of capitalism. I feel like in so many ways it's like that's the addiction that like leads to the demons that we are dealing with destroying the world now.
AI psychosis. Type beat.
AI psychosis, but just like the craving of more that you don't like have any kind of like communal or grounded relationship with, and it just becomes this like Elon Musk on ketamine or endlessly wanting your balance to be higher and your dick to be bigger than your competitors and stuff. It's so frustrating. What were you saying?
Yeah, one other thing.
Things. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Sorry, one thing I wanted to make sure we brought up at least one time in this discussion, and I think that you referenced big brains, which made me think of Vonnegut. And I do think he would probably not consider himself an anthropologist, but I do see anthropology all over his writing, and it's a great example of where my interest in anthropology came from. Sort of a fictional source. I had no idea that I was taking in some pretty serious contemporary anthropology at the time, because I have no doubt whatsoever that Vonnegut was keeping up with his contemporary anthropology, even at, like I said, where the public post 1900 or so, it had completely dropped off. And a great example of it is Cat's Cradle, which is the title of one of Vonnegut's books. And it's also a seminal work by an anthropologist who was studying what was called cultural horizons. And it struck me much later, after reading about the concept of cultural horizons, which was in the book The Dawn of Everything, that these cultural horizons...
I knew you weren't done with Grabe.
Yeah, I know, right? I brought up him accidentally, but I just wanted to cite my source, and that's where I'd learned about this concept of cultural horizons. And the people who originally studied that were looking for things like cat's cradles, which were these patterns that you could tie strings in, and that became a way that we could trace, much like different types of pottery. We have linear pottery culture, and we have the lapida horizon. Before we have official nation states, we just have kind of affinity groups who make similar pottery and who tie
pot
knots
shards are
similarly.
incredibly important in archaeology. That's kind of why I decided not to go that way, because it's very boring to me.
Yeah, but
ultimately.
it's clear that Vonnegut actually knew about that. He wouldn't just make a reference to Cat's Cradle, and it turns out that it's actually a major theme in the book, the idea of two cultures coming together or having these schismogenetic breaks. And I don't want to give away the ending of that book. It's a great read, but it's two societies that clash and ultimately learn one cannot exist with the other. And it's like an existential example of schismogenesis that I think it's pretty clear Vonnegut was quite well read on his anthropology, much more so than the average person. And that allowed him to create these very imaginative, super forward-thinking stories. I think that really helped him to be so much more creative than other people in his time, I think.
I was just to dovetail on what you're saying about Vonnegut, too, I always loved Vonnegut's use of the butthole as a universal symbol of humanity, and it's something he referenced frequently. I thought that was very... he had a very artful, tasteful way of doing that. So, respect on that. I guess...
well, Billy, you didn't. I think you finished
LCWs.
explaining the stoned ape theory to everybody.
Well, I guess not, because it's a good point. I just sort of referenced it. The idea is that human beings, at a very early evolutionary point, took psychedelic mushrooms that were found as just like a part of like a scavenging process. And they, in the process of doing that, had a lot of effects that were some physiological, mostly social. And just the increased, like, sort of social lubrication that came from that shared drug experience, that shared psychedelic experience, is something that is arguably what's depicted in the original sin in the Bible. It's something that has many similar depictions in other religions and languages. It's something that I think explains, again, a lot of the fraught relationships human beings have with drugs, which, to bring it back to Vonnegut, too, Vonnegut was one of the first persons I ever read who was really consistently... it's not like a controversial opinion, but like just being like, yeah, alcohol is a drug by any objective definition of the term.
Yeah.
Just being one of the people to like point that out and sort of like make that, it's a silly thing, but it's also like, yeah, that's a great point. And again, to like talk about ways in which people are formed by their world around them. Drugs are such an important part of this. And, like the Germans and their beer, the soldiers these days, like the Fort Bragg cartel stuff that just came out with the way in which soldiers are selling drugs and on amphetamines all the time. It's like this, the ways, the drugs that dominate our society do a lot to define the kind of human beings we are still.
Right. And obviously Vonnegut was keenly aware of the use of drugs by the Nazis, for example, and was very much critical his whole career of the Nazis, but also was understanding of the complexities.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry.
Hey, we knew you were alive. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, the
sorry
Mother
about
Night.
that.
Favorite
Yeah,
Vonnegut
so
book.
Mother Night is a great example.
Here, one sec.
Okay. Well, what were you going to say before Axiom? Do you remember?
Here, one sec. Just hold on
We're good.
for a second. Gotta get my headphones reattached.
Can I finish
Okay.
my thought on Mother Night real quick?
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah, so Vonnegut in this book, Mother Night, this is really a great example of where we often quote, it was our very first thing we released, really, that we said we don't want to go through the motions of pretending to be someone that we're not. And that's the book
Right.
where that we got that lesson from, Mother Night by Vonnegut, which
Yeah.
is a great example of him being an anthropologist in practice. The story came from speaking to a Nazi in the United States who had escaped through the rat line and learning the story and basically writing the very human story of him being taken to the Nuremberg trials, and how similarly the pursuit for former Nazis became a witch hunt, just like the hunt for Jews was in Germany. And so he was
Right.
keenly aware of that and was describing, much like an anthropologist would, just like a student would write a piece, The Anthropology of the American Workplace. Mother Night
Right.
is kind of him writing as an American who went and served in the war, ended up being captured by the Germans and experiencing Dresden as a prisoner of war in Germany, and then coming back
Right.
and recognizing that there really aren't many pure good people in the conflict, that everything is gray, and he never really wrote pure good guys or pure bad guys,
And
famously.
he also had a good way of threading the needle on that sort of thing of being like, look, in just self-interested terms, you don't want to be sharing a country with these people because you will feel the consequences too, no matter who you are, and you'll
Exactly.
feel them in your very fucking soul.
Right.
And like that is, and also like your cities can be destroyed and like your loved ones can be killed, and like I think he did a great job of like threading those needles.
Absolutely.
But we're not here to talk about Kurt Vonnegut. We're spiraling out into all sorts of digressions, and I want to sort of round out the show. Did you have any thoughts before you cut off there, Axiom? I wasn't sure if there was something you were getting to. I can't remember now.
Yeah, I wanted to, before we got into the big digression about Kurt Vonnegut, I wanted to talk about psilocybin and the stone ape theory.
Right. We were
yeah.
talking about that a little bit. Yeah.
So, yeah, first off, I just want to bring up that the stone ape theory, while interesting, isn't something that Terence McKenna really meant to be taken seriously as, like, a theory or a hypothesis. It was more so, like, he would rant about things, and, like, that's, like, a word he uses, and it was sort
He was
of
great
more,
at it.
yeah, it was more so to get you, like, excited about the possibilities that were, like, open to the field of, like, studying psychedelics.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now,
Right.
I also want to say that, like, you know, briefly, the history of psilocybin coming from, I mean, we have evidence that's been used in, like, a variety of different cultures. It was recently discovered that people in Africa had psilocybin-containing mushrooms that they kind of knew about. But Maria Sabina, the indigenous, like, was the woman who gave to outsiders, like, psilocybin mushrooms for the first time. She gave them cubensis, which she shared with Wasson, and I believe that Hoffman was also present. And so, yeah, it's, like, also sort of a really interesting, like, piece in, like, anthropology insofar as it's two cultures contacting and sharing a technology between each other, and that being for both better and for worse. Maria Sabina, her house was burnt down by her neighbors.
Jesus.
As a result of her giving psilocybin to outsiders. Now, eventually they did actually rebuild a house for her. If you go to that town in Mexico, there's a statue of Maria Sabina. But she also, told Wasson, like, hey, this is going to be a betrayal if you share this with anybody. And, of course, he immediately did that. So, yeah, if...
Can't trust white people.
Yeah. I also just want to
suggest
Brian
anthropology.
Blilmirth has a really great graphic novel about all of this stuff called Mycelium Wassoni. So if you just want to have, like, a brief, like, comic retelling of that whole history, I think it's really interesting. But yeah,
that's a good story to close out on. Actually, that really ties up a lot of points, and just like I said, that fraught relationship. It's about sort of like at least demystifying and understanding it, not like hiding the truth because there's another story that makes you feel better. Because that's a lot of what's going on these days.
Also, there's like tons of evidence for like various types of drug use in like ancient humans. Like it's not like far-fetched that humans or also other animals, we've seen them like getting drunk on fermented fruit and stuff. Like obviously like,
shared ancestors,
not even uniquely human.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that part is like not far-fetched at all. It's just the question of like, is that what the turning point was? I think it's really interesting.
Is that what caused language? I don't know.
Right. I don't know, but it's interesting to think about. Also about drugs and like how, like I was talking about alcohol being a drug. Like we've kind of witnessed in our lifetimes a huge shift in the way the culture views marijuana.
I'm glad you're bringing that up. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That you're tying that in.
Like, cause it was still illegal when I was in my state, when I was in college.
Me too.
And like, we had like I was thinking about this the other day.
Did you? Huh? I'm sure you saw the recent polls that have shown that the youngest generation is avoiding those types of vices. That went pretty viral. I don't know if that's what made you.
We're going to have a geriatric millennials moment here. But we all remember a time when it was cool and edgy to be smoking weed, and now it's like...
Yeah, we used to smoke weed in the quad, and you say that now...
It used to be hard to find.
Yes, we used to smoke up in the quad, and that was like we were literally breaking the law. Like you tell a kid that these days, and they're like, yeah, we do that.
Yeah,
but,
it was
like,
cool, bro.
I knew people who were kicked out of dorms for smoking weed. And
bro,
crazy.
I caught charges for f***ing weed. Like, I caught charges in high school.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I also had a large amount of opiates, but
the younger kids these days, they don't find that cool.
Yeah,
what's up with that?
Yeah. Well, to the kids these days listening, we are cool. Let it be known.
We broke a lot of laws. Okay,
we're demure.
Yeah, we're demure too, and we should put together a little reading list for the listeners too, of just like some good like favorite anthropology sort of adjacent books, because it is a broad, like we said, it's a broad and sweeping subject, but I wanted to get all the fun pockets in there and just sort of show you that like these are comprehensible things: who you are, who your family is, who like your enemies are in this country. All these things can be understood from the pieces of history that led to who they are today, and that's part of like what anthropology is just demystifying the human experience.
Yeah, I find myself applying it a lot in my day to day, or when I'm thinking about politics or work or whatever, thinking less about like what people are doing and more about why they're doing it. It helps me to unpack like what's going on and how to approach going back into it. Someone's, even Donald Trump, like he's doing some horrific shit, but like where did his motivations come from, and what is the environment that he grew up in?
How about the weird things he's been saying about death? Because it's pretty clear that he's having some health.
Right.
Yeah, very weird.
And religion. Like, if you have a fraught relationship with religion in your life, anthropology is the thing. Because it really is like, what does happen to you die? That's not a trivial question.
I think,
it's like...
Yeah, and it's funny to see even somebody like Donald Trump starting to wrestle with his mortality. I don't think he ever did that.
We've been wondering about for the entire human history, and that's a lot of what anthropology is about, is like looking at the scope of how humans have dealt with that, as opposed to just your specific tribe's way of dealing with that.
Exactly.
And you may find like some other way of looking at the world that resonates more with you.
Right.
I always felt like more of a Taoist than anything else from what I had been exposed to. I think Taoism's got some real in there. So we got Taoism, we got Buddhism.
I think my biggest in summation point that I want to say about that and like how it helps, how it could help you as the listener is like, it's really easy to see somebody do some horrible shit and be like, that person is evil or that whole group of people is evil. And that's, you know, in your framework, that may be the truth, but it also is never gonna like allow you to reach a point of understanding about what they're doing, why they're doing it, how you're gonna push back against them, how you're gonna change anybody's mind.
Right.
Like anthropology gives you more of a framework to actually like understand why they're doing those things so that you're not just like always stuck in this like good versus evil mentality. It's just not that productive, really.
Yeah, be more like Vonnegut.
Yeah, and I want to make a point on that specifically regarding Islam, because I have thought about this a lot in my life, because I think like it's easy to be, this is where a lot of like Reddit atheists came from, is just like there's a lot, it's really easy to look at some of the behaviors of any monotheistic religion, including Islam, and say, oh, I don't agree with living that way, or saying that your people should live that way, your women specifically. And people love to bring that up. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where it's like whatever qualms you might have with how Islam is practiced for people, ultimately that is a huge demographic around the world. Mm-hmm. And that just means you're looking at a density of human beings that at a certain point, anything you say can be true about them. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of ways to understand holistically and discuss the regressive elements of like Islamic beliefs, but I'm not qualified to have those discussions, so I'm not gonna. I just think that in general, people need to be more careful about the kind of generalizations they make about what is such an enormous group of human beings on planet Earth, and that like try to assume that they're not all like brainwashed, like people who don't have like some, you know, like that's all it is. It's about sort of like being a little more holistic and understanding towards every other kind of human being in the way that they live.
Yes.
Have you ever lived anywhere that's like UV 11, 12 all the time? Sometimes you might want to be all wrapped up in some fabric. All right. Like seriously, like I think about this. It's like, there's oppression in burqa and stuff too, but also like when you're in a bright place, sometimes I want to be covered the up. I don't know. I think it seems like there's some logic there too. I don't know. Maybe you should try living there for a while. I don't know. Maybe that's too much, but I wanted to round the show out. Does anyone have any other closing points they want to drop in there?
Read Consuming Grief by Blair Conklin. I think it's Blair Conklin. Wait, no, not Blair Conklin. That's a skimboarder. Something Conklin. Consuming Grief. There's a really great book about funerary cannibalism in Brazil. It was kind of fucked up that the Brazilian government made them stop doing that. Great book. I know I shouted on cultural relativism, but also funerary cannibalism is totally fine.
Dude, we could sit here and talk about like relativistic stuff like that for hours, and it's like these are discussions I don't necessarily like.
No, but Ax, I think you made a really good point about cultural relativism and how it interacts poorly with assumptions. Like you can't be like, if you don't know enough about a culture, you can't like even accurately figure out what you're accepting. Do you know what I mean? Or, you know, like, and that's kind of goes to your point too, Butler, about, Islam. Like, a lot of what we know in the West about, like, that religion or, like, so many things is based on assumptions and stereotypes, and it's painting such a broad brush.
And cycles of violence that our nation is complicit in, and that's the part where I just have to say to myself, like, you know what? I'm not qualified or here to be weighing in on this shit. I know what my North Stars are morally, and I will, you know, enforce those where I can. If I get to have a discussion with a Muslim person, it'll be cordial and friendly, and we'll, you know, have our respectful agreements and disagreements just like we've had here today. So it's a, you know, I don't know. I didn't mean to turn the end of the show into a diatribe about Islam, but again, it's just like any monotheistic religion, there's nothing you can point to about Islam that is uniquely evil and not present in other monotheistic religions in some form. Like that's just f***ing true. Like it drives me crazy, and we live in such a Islamophobic society here in America, especially now, that I think it's always worth checking and shouting at. And it's a part of indigenous bigotry, too.
Yeah, and thanks to the IDW psychopaths like Sam Harris and people like that for laundering those Islamophobic beliefs into the atheistic community. That was awesome.
Yeah,
Really appreciate that.
Exactly. Bill Maher, like
Bill Maher,
great
example.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy. So, and I think that's a good note to end on there. Bill Maher.
Yeah.
You can be an atheist without being a total douchebag bigot. Mm-hmm. It's possible and interesting and worthwhile, and people are interesting. And just be curious. Don't be hateful. Don't be weird either about other people's cultures. I think I definitely struggle with that sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's just be kind and get curious. And let's seriously put together some books you guys would recommend in the Discord.
Yeah, and we'll throw them in the description.
I'm going to sign off because we'll throw them in the description. Thank you for listening. If you've come this far, I'm Butler's Ghost on Blue Sky. If anyone else wants to plug any socials or handles or anything, let's do that now too.
Pervert Pirate Party later.
Pervert Pirate Party.
And then the show.
Thank you for listening.
Follow
the show.
Follow the Broken Wing podcast. Pump that
follower count up
on Blue Sky.
We promise to post episodes on there someday. We'll get to it. I'll get to it. And you know what? We have real jobs. Okay, I don't know what else to tell you guys, but thank you for listening. If you made it this far, and
this one's a premium one,
catch you on the next
enjoy
one. This will be premium. This is premium shit. So thank you for being behind the paywall if you're here too.
We'll see.
I like this one a lot. Yeah, I know. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we can.
I don't think this should be premium. I think we should make the newscast premium and just the public one because,
dude, thank you.
At least sometimes, at least sometimes, I think it's good to show people what's behind the paywall. So maybe we'll release this one.
We can talk about this later. I actually got to run and get to the farmer's market.
Me too. But I love you guys. I'll talk to you later.
Everybody.
Okay, bye.
They can send me to my knees, yeah.